Alright, everybody, it's official. This new lighting setup is the coolest thing I have ever seen. Look at that. It's so colorful. And all it is two lights. That's all I changed about this whole thing. This is exactly the same as it was before with the exception of two lights. Mwah. Okay, so the topic of today's video is not an incredibly recent one, but it is a pretty relevant one. As a disclaimer, I would like to make it clear that my goal here is to talk about movies. That's kinda what the channel's about. My goal is really not to make points about important matters or to take political stances of any kind. The only time I would ever really be discussing that on my channel would be when the topic of film dips its toes into the risky world of political and social matters. That said, this thing we're talking about, I do have an opinion about it, and the matter itself is inherently socio-political, so if you can, please try to approach this whole thing with an open mind. Even if you agree with me, this is a place for conversation about films and filmmaking, and I'm happy to hear your takes, whatever they may be. So let's get into it. As you probably read in the title already, today we are talking about the Academy Awards' so-called diversity quota. At least that's sort of the nickname the whole thing is taken on. Officially, they are the representation and inclusion standards. And they have been causing people to lose their minds for some reason. I won't get ahead of myself. At first, I was fooled as well, because at first glance, this does sort of seem authoritative on the part of the Academy. As many have been very quick to point out on this matter, it really isn't right to force an artist to abide by a checklist or a quota when they're creating their art. That's just a simple breach of creative expression. However, it's not nearly that simple. The main reason people are so freaked out about this, I think, based on what I've seen, is that they haven't really read the requirements themselves. They've merely heard what the news outlets are saying about them. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about what they really are. These are simply the standards to determine whether or not a film is eligible for the Best Picture category in the Oscars. There are 4 standards, and you only have to complete 2 of them. And these basically boil down to A, cast, B, crew, C, production company, and D, marketing. So did you catch that bit before? You only have to complete 2 of the standards. As in, you could get away with a cast and crew made up entirely of straight white males and still be eligible for the Best Picture award, provided you fulfilled requirements C and D. And when you look closely at standards C and D, you find that all you would really have to do would be to hire a couple of interns and a couple of marketing execs that aren't straight white dudes. And that's it. Done. Boxes checked. It's as easy as that. And if that sounds like a breach of creative expression to you, I have to ask you, how? If any given film doesn't already meet these requirements, then it either isn't being produced properly, or it's a statistical anomaly where the best person for every single job happens to be a straight white dude. And don't you think that's sort of insanely unlikely? Most of the people who are against these standards are really big proponents of hiring the right person for every job, regardless of race or gender or sexual orientation, etc. And that's a super fair thing to be a proponent of. But here's the thing. If you're doing that, if you're truly hiring the best person for every single job, just based on probability alone, your film set should be pretty diverse, don't you think? Even a movie like The Irishman, which centers mostly around a bunch of old white dudes. Again, the cast is only standard A, and you get to pick 2 of the 4 standards. And that's what I think people are missing about this. It doesn't affect the way you tell the story, because you can put whoever you want in the cast. If it needs to be a bunch of old white dudes, that's fine, as long as you have some other people behind the scenes doing some of the work. So when you search up this topic on YouTube, the first video result to come up has about 2 million views, and it's a take from late night host Bill Maher about this topic. Based on its high like counts, I can assume that this is generally fairly representative of the opinion of somebody who opposes these standards. And another reason I've chosen this is because Bill actually does make some decent points in this video, though many of them do heavily rely on some basic misinterpretations of what these standards are. So let's jump into this, and I can do my best to sort of debunk what I believe to be some misconceptions in here.
The Oscars thought it would be a good time to announce a new set of requirements for Best Picture nominees that are based on fulfilling diversity quotas. The Academy is not exactly unknown for rewarding liberal virtue. They should call Best Picture most worthy.
This has nothing to do with the thing, but I just gotta point this out. The way he delivers a joke is set up, punchline, stare. Wait for laughs, continue waiting for laughs. They finally laugh, they applaud. now we can move on to the next joke. It's like he's holding his audience hostage to laugh at him, or he won't move on. He won't let them leave.
Look at the contenders and winners in recent years. Been nominated not by their popularity with audiences, but by diversity and virtue signaling. Parasite, A Beautiful Mind, Moonlight, Brokeback Mountain, Call Me By Your Name, and many more.
Dude, you just listed like a bunch of really good movies. You know that, right? I see this all the time about Brokeback and Call Me By Your Name specifically. That like, oh, it's just Oscar bait because it's virtue signaling. They're romance movies. They happen to be really good romance movies. Not everything that exhibits something you're not used to is virtue signaling. Maybe it was made to, I don't know, tell a story, like movies do. So yeah, he lists a bunch of really good and impactful movies without providing an alternative. He does not say what should have gotten the win or the nomination that year. He just lists a bunch of good movies that did and also happen to have some representation in them. I don't know, maybe we don't need to go, oh, Oscar's so woke every time they nominate or award a movie that manages to touch on socially significant matters.
To compete for Best Picture, a film must meet the standards of 2 of 4 new inclusion groups. Group A.
I'll spare you the details of it, but he only talks about Standard A. And while he says that you only need 2 of 4 of the standards, he really doesn't make it very clear what the other ones are and how easy they are to fulfill. Instead, he cherry picks and he presents option A. And this is why people oppose these things, by the way. It's because news sources and late night hosts and people who are kind of supposed to be voices of reason, like Bill Maher, believe it or not, they just keep misrepresenting what these things actually are. So yeah, if you look at it, Standard A, it's the toughest of them all. And it's the harshest, because if Standard A were mandatory, a lot of films could never be made. A lot of war films where most of the main characters are men, pretty much any mob movie, the list goes on. Standard A is a little bit harsh, but there's a reason it's not mandatory. You can avoid it if you just hire some interns who are minorities. It's not hard.
And that's only Group A.
Exactly, Bill. It's only Group A.
It's also important that we don't wind up with artists guided less by a creative vision and more by a to-do list.
Okay, so let's talk about this, and let's use one of Bill's examples, because later in this clip he's going to talk about Steven Spielberg, director of the acclaimed World War II film Schindler's List. It is true that artists should be guided by creative vision and not by a checklist. But I think that Bill misunderstands the way the filmmaking process happens here, just a tiny bit. Steven Spielberg is not directly responsible for hiring every person behind the scenes of one of his films. Steven Spielberg can write any script that he wants and then produce it, easily within these guidelines. Since the guidelines for the cast are, again, not mandatory, they won't affect his storytelling here. They don't have to affect what he writes at all. He can write whatever he wants to. Worrying about a checklist in this case, that's the job of the production company. And the production company, they're about practicality, and that's just as important in the filmmaking world as artistry is, don't get me wrong. Bill acts like it's this whole new big concept that, oh no, when you're making a movie, you gotta worry about checklists and meticulous details. Dude, movies have been doing that for so long, man. There are so many checklists involved in making a movie. I'm a filmmaker, at least an aspiring one, and when I'm on set, I have this thing called a shot list, and it's the shots that I need to get through to get the movie filmed. That's how movie making works. It's a little bit of artistry and then a lot of checklists to execute it.
Kirstie Alley did. She tweeted, "Can you imagine telling Picasso what had to be in his f***ing paintings? You people have lost your minds. Oscar Orwell." Wow. You know Hollywood is in trouble when the voice of sanity is a Scientologist.
I'm with Bill on this one. I'm no big fan of Scientology either, but I'm not the one who's agreeing with the Scientologists. That's all I'm saying. Also, this is not the same as telling Picasso what needs to be in his paintings. Paintings are typically done by one person. A movie set could be hundreds of people. And again, not about what's in the paintings or not about what's in the movies. Just has to be some representation behind the scenes. There is no actual control of the art itself going into this.
Some of the best movies ever made were by refugees from communist and fascist countries who got out because they didn't like being told what art was acceptable.
The difference between this and something like communism or fascism is the difference between the government and an awards show. This is not a government-enforced rule. You could still make a movie with whatever people you want. You just can't necessarily be eligible for the Best Picture award at one specific award show. They can give out the award to whoever they want to, and it is not Orwellian because they're not the government.
Having worked in this industry a long time, at the end of the day, people don't want to be hired because they filled the quota. They want to be hired because they're good.
Exactly. Now, Bill kind of brings it full circle there. If everyone on this set is being hired because they're good, then there should be no need for the quota. But the problem is, some people out there won't hire the best person for each job on a movie set because of their own personal prejudices. And while Hollywood, yes, it's a liberal environment, and so that might represent a select few, it's not surprising or unreasonable that the Oscars, an award show which hands out prizes to notable and good films, would want to provide some incentive for inclusion, even if it's just the bare minimum. Got one more important thing to express, and then I'll end this video. These are the standards to be eligible for the Best Picture award at the Oscars. These are not, as many people seem to want to believe, the standards to make a movie. In fact, if you felt so inclined, you could make a movie that meets none of these requirements with the least diverse cast, crew, and production company imaginable, and your movie would still get made. Beyond that, you could still go on to win Oscars for that movie, just not Best Picture, but that's a risk you knew you were taking when you made that movie in that way. So all that's happening here is the Academy is saying, listen, we're only, for this one particular category, going to accept films that meet a bare minimum set of criteria. You can choose to put in the minimal effort required to meet those criteria, or you can just not be considered for the award. The response to that, in my opinion, should be, hey, you know what? Your award show, your rules. If I want that award, I'm going to meet those requirements. And if I don't, then I don't have to worry about it. If your response is not that, but instead, hey, back away from my artistic liberty, then maybe you should do a little bit of soul searching and figure out what it is that really bothers you about this whole thing. That's all. So yeah, I just thought I would give my 2 cents on the matter, give you my actual opinion as a film geek, especially since people really don't seem to understand the really minimal implications of what this is. Now that's mostly the fault of news outlets and people like Bill Maher, who decide to give out this information just at face value without an actual explanation of it. And really, it's more complicated than it appears at face value, and so that sort of blatant oversimplification is harmful. So do I think that a new rule that says movies can't be considered for one particular award if they have a cast, crew, and production company of all straight white dudes? Do I think that that one rule for one particular award and one particular awards show is harmful? I'm gonna have to say no. It's not crazy. It's not dystopian. Now, do I think that it will have a significant impact on diversity in the industry? Also, no. Like I said, most film sets should already be meeting these criteria. And the ones that weren't probably weren't going to be winning Oscars anyway. So yeah, these diversity requirements, quota, standards, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't really matter. They're not going to do anything bad. They're also probably not going to do anything good. So chill out. But what do I know? Probably not much. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, I'm Sam Morgan, and this is Pictures Up.